Morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is the palatial mansion that former Police Commissioner Augustine Chihuri built in Harare. You'll be forgiven to think it's a mansion of a movie star somewhere in Hollywood or Florida or some such place. And yet, it was the mansion that the former police commissioner built. He was the police commissioner of the Banana Republic. The filthy rich ruling elite were building themselves mansions, whilst the millions of ordinary Zimbabweans languished in abject poverty. The regime was so obsessed about retaining power at all costs. They rigged the elections, and they were even prepared to kill to stay in power. And when you look at their lifestyle, that's when you begin to understand why they were prepared to kill. Of course, Augustine Chihuri was under no illusion that if power was to change hands, he would be asked, how did you get all that money to build such a mansion? He couldn't possibly explain it. And it wasn't him alone. This was the norm. Vice President Constantino Chiwenga had his own mansion, C&M, which he has since abandoned to build one that looks like the White House and is sometimes called the White House. Mugabe himself built his blue roof mansion. When you look at these people, you begin to understand why they were rigging elections. They just were not prepared to give up all this wealth. And of course, maintaining a house like this, a mansion like this, you need money. And so money's got to keep coming in. And if you have no business or high investments, you've got to maintain your hand in the till, keep on looting. Of course, the wealth that Chihuri got was from looting. It is believed that he's got other properties worth 32 million US dollars in Zimbabwe. But he left all that in 2017 after the military coup, after the musical chairs that saw the Lacoste faction getting into power. And Chihuri was in the G40 faction. And he, most of the G40 guys, had to abandon their mansions. including Xavier Kasukuwere, now in hiding in South Africa. Professor Jonathan Moyo is hiding in Kenya. Augustine Chihuri himself is in Malawi. And many others have all scattered. They to leave their mansions, farms, businesses in a huff when the others are not peer faction took over. Some people have often wondered why has the Lacoste faction not followed up and seized all these looted properties. So they can't afford to do that. Because if they were to do that, people like Augustine Chihuri may reveal where he got his loot. And not only that, he will also reveal who else was looting. And most of Mnangagwa and company will find their names included in that list. So the safe thing to do is maybe persecute a few of the G40 guys, but otherwise do not investigate, do not dig too deep. But if there was to be a genuine change of government in Zimbabwe, if that government was doing its job properly, then of course, these people must reveal where the hell they got all this money to build these mansions. One has got to accept, to realize rather, the expense, the cost to the nation of these mansions. Money that should have been used to build power stations to increase Zimbabwe's power generation, for instance, was the one that was being creamed off to build these mansions. And so, for instance, Zimbabwe, since independence in 1980, had not built any additional power generation. And so by the 1990s, hardly 10 years after independence, the country was already having power shortage. And that has been the norm for the last 30 years. The cost to the nation of all these power cuts is just unbelievable. A mansion like this one, $7 million US, would have built probably Wange Stage 7, which was only completed last year. So if that money had been used to build Wange Stage 7, say in the late 1980s, think of the power generation that it would have contributed to the whole economy and the downstream benefits of that. over the last 30 years. And yet that money was used by one individual to build a sprawling palatial mansion. I don't know how many bedrooms there are there. But one has got to say, why would you need such a big house? And over the years, it has not generated any wealth at all. If it was his own money, I would not question. But this was not his own money. This was national wealth being looted by the few individuals to gratify their insatiable greed. And with it, the nation had to pay the double price, that having whetted their appetites, they were not prepared to give up power anymore. And so for the last 44 years, the country has been stuck with this tyrannical, corrupt, incompetent regime that would not give up power because they've amassed so much wealth, they can't afford to give that up. So we have had to pay double. Now we are stuck with a regime, this so called Second Republic that replaced the Banana Republic. It was just a name. The Second Republic was the Banana Republic by another name, that's all. Because they continued the vote rigging, the killing to stay in power has continued. Fortunately, as people often say, in life, things do change. Nothing stays the same. ZANU-PF's hold on power is not as secure as the regime would like to believe it is. For the last 10 years at least, ZANU-PF has had the benefit of the backing of South Africa, the ANC government. The ANC government has propped up the regime at all costs. But that is certainly about to change. South Africa has been independent since 1994 and has been ruled by ANC for the last 30 years. The gross mismanagement, the corruption in South Africa is well documented. And yet the people of South Africa have kept faith with the ANC. But recent events show that the people of South Africa are sick and tired of ANC. ANC itself has tried to prop up ZANU-PF in the hope that if there is no political change in Zimbabwe, South Africans will be reluctant to have any change in South Africa. But unfortunately, unfortunately for ANC, South Africa has had the legacy of holding free, fair, and credible elections. And so, in a free, fair, and credible election, ultimately, the ANC could not avoid being accountable to the people. And the people of South Africa, ordinary people of South Africa, They've become sick and tired of ANC's gross mismanagement and rampant corruption. And indeed, ANC's close association with ZANU-PF has only reminded South Africans themselves that that is exactly where South Africa was going. It was just becoming another Zimbabwe. South Africa last year had some serious load shedding, and it was the same problem. For the last 30 years, the ANC government has failed to invest in any serious power generation plant in that country. They had the mentality of ZANU-PF of increasing the load end. Popular thing, of course, with the electorate, promising them electrification. You'll have electricity, but if you do not generate to meet that demand, load shedding is inevitable. And that is exactly what South Africa has been suffering the last year. And in a democratic country, the electorate have a say. I think South Africans have been slow to use their democratic vote wisely. But I think this year they are prepared to give ANC a bloody nose. In exactly 9 days from now, on the 29th of May, South Africans will be voting. And the indications are that South ANC government will not have the comfortable majority that it used to enjoy these last 30 years. ANC tried to invite ZANU-PF to witness the South African elections. All the other South African stakeholders in that election, knowing ZANU-PF's reputation, did not want ZANU-PF to participate. And they protested strongly that ZANU-PF should not be allowed. And this cartoon really depicts that story very well. In the child primary school books in the past, they had these stories of the hare and the baboon. And this cartoon is encapsulating that story, where the baboon was untrustworthy and they had been playing tricks on the hare for so long, and the hare decided that they were going to have their revenge. And so they bent the grass around their home and invited the baboon to come and join in the feast. And of course, the baboon had to walk on all four to get there. And with the bent grass, it meant by the time they arrive, their hands are dirty. And so the hare will say to them, "Go back and wash your hands." And this is exactly what this cartoon is depicting. As much as ZANU-PF wanted to participate in the elections in South Africa, South Africans have made it abundantly clear that the ZANU-PF is not welcome. Mnangagwa rigged last year's elections. And it was only with the help of ANC that SADC did not take any serious measures to deny ZANU-PF political legitimacy. But if ANC get a bloody nose in these elections, I believe they will not be so forthcoming in propping up ZANU-PF for the simple reason that the people of South Africa are beginning to see that the ANC that is a replica of ZANU-PF is a complete disaster for that country. The last thing they want is a corrupt, incompetent ANC running down the country the way ZANU-PF has destroyed Zimbabwe. And so if ANC gets a bloody nose in these elections, even if they still manage to somehow form the next government, the message would have been sent loudly and very clearly that South Africans do not want another ZANU-PF party ruling their country. And supporting ZANU-PF will only be seen as South Africa trying to replicate what ZANU-PF has done in Zimbabwe. And so ZANU-PF will find itself very much isolated. And let me say this, every thinking Zimbabwean would want that relationship with South Africa, where ANC propped up ZANU-PF, to end. Zimbabwe and Zimbabweans cannot afford to have another rigged election in 2028. And that is exactly where we are going. As long as we've got ZANU-PF and they've got the confidence that South Africa will prop them up no matter what. So a clear message this early that ANC is not going to prop up ZANU-PF will be a welcome message. And that message could be delivered even sooner because SADC is supposed to hold their summit in August in Zimbabwe. And it is widely believed that South Africans, or rather some of the SADC leaders, have asked that Zimbabwe's election, last year's election, should be on the agenda. So ZANU-PF is not out of the woods yet. This issue of rigged elections, it keeps coming back. And Mnangagwa must be getting seriously worried. There have been reports that he's now talking with Professor Welshman Nuwe, who is taken over as leader of one of the four factions of Triple C when it imploded. No doubt Mnangagwa is hoping that Professor Welshman Nuwe would publicly endorse him as the legitimate president of Zimbabwe. That the 2023 elections, yes, they had some problems, but we've come up to an agreement, we've sorted it out ourselves in-house. That is totally unacceptable. And I think Professor Welshman Nuwe must know that this idea of selling out to ZANU-PF, to keep ZANU-PF in power, is totally unacceptable. MDC and Professor Welshman Nuwe was in the MDC GNU government. He was one of the ministers, failed to implement even one reform during the GNU. And that's allowing ZANU-PF to retain its carte blanche powers to rig elections. This cannot continue. The people of Zimbabwe cannot afford to have this looting, corrupt, incompetent ZANU-PF regime in power any longer. So I hope, and I sincerely hope, that come 29th of May, a clear message will be sent to ZANU-PF that the show is over. The Lacoste faction, who thought they could now rule forever, the message is everything comes to an end. And for you, we are seeing the beginning of the end. Nothing in this world stays forever. Thank you very much for listening and have a good night.